In this episode of the Digital Trailblazer podcast, we're going to talk about something a little bit different today. We're going to talk about how to keep your faith and family first while you're building a wildly successful business. So stay tuned.
If you want to build a legitimate, profitable online business without shiny objects, without the hypey gimmicks, and without the stress and overwhelm, if you want to make more money without having to be present online all day, every day, pumping out content that nobody sees and hustling DMs to generate leads and sales, then this is the place for you. Welcome to the Digital Trailblazer podcast, your online business university, where you'll learn how ordinary people start from ground zero with no influence, no email list or audience to sell to, and no business or marketing experience, and go from working 9-to-5 jobs to building successful 6- and 7-figure online businesses and all the steps in between. Learn the strategies that worked and what didn't. Learn the mistakes that they made and how to avoid them, and then learn their plans for scaling their businesses and taking things to the next level. All so that you can build your business faster and easier and make more money without sacrificing the things that are important to you in your life. I'm your host, Leah Ray Getz, and with me is my husband, Todd. Now, let's get to it with today's guest.
Hello, everybody. I am Todd Getz of the Digital Trailblazer podcast, and with me today is Rhea Lana Riner. Rhea, welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to have you on here today to share your story. Why don't you just give our audience a little bit of an introduction about who you are and a little bit about where you've been and how you got to where you are today.
Hi, Todd. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today. Yes, I'm sort of an accidental entrepreneur. My story began about 30 years ago, honestly. I was a stay-at-home mom, and I've loved cute kids' clothes, but couldn't afford them. And there weren't many secondhand shopping opportunities then. And so I had a little pop-up event in my living room, and that's really where it all started.
And now you have, a huge franchise. It was 120 locations. Is that right?
Yes, we have 120 locations in about 26 states. I'm a mom and a grandmom. And so it's just been a really wonderful journey. I say I'm just a really average person, but ended up on this journey and continuing to just grow as a business leader. And it just ended up just really enjoying life and combining business and family and faith and all of those things.
I know that's one of the things for a lot of people. The whole reason why they start their business is because they want to have more time for the things that really matter. And I know for me and my wife, that was definitely the case. I mean, we had very successful jobs and careers working in healthcare IT. We were making a lot of money. I mean, money was not the issue. It was the time. And so when we decided to try to start a business so that when kids finally came, we could actually spend time with them, to homeschool them, to do all the things that we wanted to do with them. The jobs were getting in the way. so that's kind of what prompted us to start our business. And then I think everybody kind of has this idea of it's going to be easier, even when we think, okay, yeah, starting a business is going to be hard, but I can do it. And then you get in there, and building a business is very challenging. And I think what a lot of people get into is this whole hustle and grind culture. And you expect that you can just do the hustle, or you can do the grind for maybe a year or a few months or whatever it is. And then you build your business, and then you can step back and things are going to be on autopilot or whatever. And it never really happens that way. And you just kind of get stuck in this grind. And now you're working more than you worked at your full-time job. Maybe you're still at home, but you still don't have the time that you want. How did you do this? Like that's what I want. What's your story? How did you manage to do this?
Mhm. Well, it started again when my children were small, quite a while ago, and I had this love for secondhand children's clothes. We lived in a small town at the time, and to get good deals on clothes, you had two choices. You could either go to the two expensive boutiques in town where one outfit cost $100, and I couldn't afford that, or you went to Walmart. And at Walmart at the time, you washed things one time and it fell apart, and then also when I had nice things and I would want to sell them, the local consignment stores, I'd take them and I kind of felt like they fell into a big black hole. Like I didn't know which ones had sold and for how much. And so there was just this idea forming in my heart and mind that there had to be a better way for secondhand shopping experience. And so my husband was in the corporate world. He had an engineering job. We lived in Texas, and he had the opportunity to change careers and go into nonprofit ministry work. And so we moved to Arkansas. But with that move, we took quite a nosedive in our family income. I was a stay-at-home mom. I have a college degree. It's not very useful, though, like being a teacher or a nurse. And so when when our income changed, I had to figure out how to help with the income a little bit. I also did want to be present. We had 3 small children under the age of 5, and so I did want to be present. But I will tell you, I didn't have any business or entrepreneurial background. I just kind of was thinking of what would make my life better. Really, I was thinking of it was really kind of selfish, and moms like me. And so when my youngest child was headed into preschool, I just decided to invite some friends to let me sell their clothes, their children's clothes in my living room. I was an introvert, to be honest. I didn't know anything about marketing, anything about business. I did learn that if I sent out 100 postcards, I could get a bulk mail rate. So that was sort of my goal. I sent out 100 postcards, and I was thrilled that 11 moms actually let me have their things. So they brought their clothes. My husband helped me move all the furniture out of our living room. We set up 3 racks of clothes. I washed everything. I really wanted things to be perfect. I put little string tags on them. And then I had my first sale. And Todd, to be honest, the first one failed. Like I mentioned, I didn't have a marketing background, and I didn't realize that I needed to actually invite people. I kind of thought, well, if it's perfect enough, people will come. So I reached out to all 11 of those families, those consigners, and I said, will you please let me try again? And so I kept their things, and I had to go out and invite people. And this was in the 90s where the internet wasn't really even coming online much yet. And so you had to do grassroots marketing. I had to get out and invite people, and I had to learn that I had to put myself out there. And then people did come, and they loved it. They honestly loved the experience. And after that first sale, my husband said, Rhea Lana, you should computerize this. Now, that doesn't mean anything now because our lives all run on computers. But in the 90s, that was a big deal because stay-at-home moms like me did not have computers in their home. And so he's kind of always done that as kind of a side thing that he enjoys. And so we built out our own technology, and we were able to offer, we joked that we probably had the only barcoded garage sale in the world at the time, but we scanned barcodes, but that way we could offer this exceptional experience where every mom who brought me their things, I could print out a report and I could show her exactly what sold and for how much. And so that was, for me, was solving the experience that I'd had in consignment stores. And then again, everything looked like a department store or a boutique. It was just very organized and pretty. And I just felt like secondhand shopping didn't have to be digging through piles of junk. It could be special. And I really wanted to create this really special experience for moms. And I think I just know that moms are busy. Moms are juggling a lot. And so I really have always wanted to create this experience that moms could feel special while they were serving their families. So that's really how it started, and it grew. There's been so many challenges along the way, and I think, but one of the things that has really grounded me is just trying to keep those priorities of faith. For sure, trying to stay married, trying to raise good kids and now grandkids, and then now building a business. And I think when those things are important to you, it helps you to prioritize and make good decisions at the right time. But the growth was gradual. Thankfully, I grew into business, and because we did bootstrap it, no one was giving us money. And so I had to work hard to make money to be able to afford that next stage of growth. I'm just a very average, normal gal. My dad was military. My mom was a teacher. And so it gave me a chance to just learn business and learn that I needed to end up with a profit. So it's definitely been a gradual journey, but one that's been really rewarding.
Well, let's talk about that faith and family part, because I think that's so much of what's missing. The number, I think, is large of entrepreneurs who struggle in their relationships. But when you start a business, a lot of times a business takes priority over everything. Even though you say, yeah, family is important. Well, okay, a sales call pops up and their only availability is dinner time. It's just these little things that here and there, and whatever it is, the business seems to take priority, or there's an emergency and now we've got to leave and we got to take care of this. And so now can't go to the kids' band concert. What are the things that you do to actually really, in a tangible way, prioritize your faith and family over business when it seems like business is always the emergency or the primary thing that you're worrying about at the moment?
Well, it's true because it is never ending. And I think that's a lesson I learned. I think in the early years, I kind of kept thinking, okay, I can get through my emails. But then, as the years go on, the emails never end and the problems honestly never end. And so I do think you've got to figure out how to prioritize what's important. But it takes me back to a time in my journey when we were trying to figure this out. And for my business are these pop-up events. And so when it was time for me to do an event, I would pull out of the family, and there was no food in the refrigerator, the laundry wasn't done, all the things that I had done as a stay-at-home mom, all of a sudden just nothing got done. And there was a time when and it was growing and it was taking on more. And I remember that my husband, we sat down one time and he was saying, this might be too much for us. And I had to really think through what was more important to me. Was being married and my husband's view of the business, or did I have my own selfish agenda on it? And I think it was a great test of myself of, was I willing to sort of take this business at a pace that my family could handle? Or was I going to just be selfish and just keep pushing and pushing? Because there was plenty of business out there for me. I kind of envisioned kind of this altar and kind of just laying the business on the altar and kind of try to work with, because if you are married, you got to make this thing work with the person that you're with, and it affects the whole family. And so for me, it was hard to do because I was beginning to feel kind of a calling on my life because I was young, I was probably in my 30s, and I'd lived long enough to kind of figure out what you're good at. And it kind of felt like this thing was working, and I wanted to go hard charge and go for it. So I do think that if we will just be selfish in the pursuit of building our business, we want to be competitive and we want to grow, but I do think we need to step back and make sure we're not being selfish with it. And really, again, look at how we've spent our hours in the day. And it doesn't mean that we give equal hours to equal priority. We can't. But what needs are that day? Does the family need more of me this day? Does my business need more of me this day? And then we have to adjust. I heard she was a former Pepsi CEO recently I saw, and she said it's not about balance, it's about juggling. But that was so true. It's a juggle. It's an art. But I also do think that if we will cut out the time wasters as much as possible, how much are we spending scrolling our life away on our iPhones? And I know in my early years, I really did that. I identified like the 4 areas I really wanted to prioritize: my marriage and my kids and my faith and my business. And so I said no to a lot of things. I wasn't on the school PTO or every group that asked me to be in charge. And I think that is something that probably women really struggle with, is because we are asked to do so much, especially if we're a little competent, and it can be hard to say no because you want to please and you want to add value everywhere. But I think we do have to just keep a pretty narrow focus of where we want to go so that we can win in the things that are important to us.
My wife is so good at that, at just squeezing in the things that she needs to in the time that she has. And it's one of the things I struggle with. But she has a half hour before a meeting, she'll squeeze in her lunch in there. Or if there's a half hour between sales calls, she'll say, okay, well, this is time I'm going to spend with my kids. I'm going to read them a book. Rather than saying, okay, I got a half hour before my meeting, no time to do this, no time to do that. Let's scroll around on the phone. Okay, time for the meeting, right? I know that I catch myself doing that a lot. And it's one of the things I know I got to work on. My wife is really good at it. So
You guys can help each other, provide accountability.
It's one of those things where she's, always on me. So I know that we could get a lot more done if those in-between times where you think you can't squeeze anything in, instead of scrolling around on your phone, just squeeze it in. She gets her workouts in every single day. And I get...
For her. Wow.
Yeah. I get maybe 1 or 2 a week, but no, I take that back. I do make time for that because I do judo 3 times a week, and I do that with my kids. So it's our kid time too. Another part of this is not just family, but also faith, because people who have a strong faith, we know that this needs to come first in our lives. It's not always easy to do because a lot of times it's just reserved to a half hour or an hour on Sundays. And what are the other ways that you integrate faith into your business?
When I was just getting started in business, like I mentioned, I didn't know much about business. And I really didn't even know many women in business that were trying to do what I was trying to do. And I began to read some books by Mary Kay Ash. She created cosmetics. She's passed now. And I didn't want to sell products. It wasn't about learning about sales, but it was learning about women in business. And so I remember finding every book I could find. I highly recommend reading her stories because she ended up really pushing the glass ceiling for women, especially in business. But one of the things I learned from her was the golden rule principle. And it's a biblical principle, actually, but I really used it as I was building out my business. And, basically, you want to treat other people the way you would want to be treated. And so I have found that as I've developed my how are we going to treat our consigners and our workers, and even now I have a corporate team. How would I want to be treated if I was on a corporate team? And I think that's where the Bible, I think, comes in so handy because they're timeless principles, and the values of our company, they're from the Bible, but they also work so well in business, honesty. And it actually reminds me, there was a period of time when I was in this battle with the government, actually, and I would get on calls. I was working with a group out of DC, and they were so gracious to support me in the effort. And at the time, I was barely above a stay-at-home mom. We had just franchised, and I don't think I'd ever spoken to an attorney in my entire life. And I was terrified, But every time we'd get on the phone, they'd ask me these questions, and I would give them my answers. And at one point, they said, "Rhea Lana, every time we talk to you, you just give us the same answer. Like, your story isn't changing. We think you're being honest." And I remember thinking, well, of course. And I realized that a lot of what they were doing was trying to work with people who really weren't honest, who were just trying to skirt by the law or maybe fudge or be gray. And it just taught me a lesson that I may not know everything about business, and I might make some mistakes along the way, but I'm going to always do what's right to the best of my ability. And I'm going to always treat people right to the best of my ability. And really, those go back to biblical principles. And I just think faith is so important, and it gets you, I'm now in 60, and I have this 30-year track record, and I haven't done everything perfectly. But when you do wake up every day and you do try to do the next right thing, and you do really try to add value to people's life and honor them and be gracious, then you end up on a path of personal growth and leadership. It's a blessing.
From all the things that you've said, what I'm getting from this, and even from our own personal experience, is that we don't want to sacrifice our values. We don't want to sacrifice our family or our faith for quick wins. And I think that's what a lot of people expect that they can do, is that I'm going to put this stuff aside for a bit so that I can build this business really fast and be very successful and make millions within the next couple months or the next year or whatever. And then I'll come back and I'll make the family and the faith a priority again. And so many times I see broken relationships. I see moms and dads being separated from the kids because of the divorce, but they have a successful business, right? But are they really happy in life? My wife will often say this on her sales calls, is that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. We're building a solid foundation here. We're not worried about going so fast that we lose everything along the way. And that may mean that you're not making millions of dollars within your first couple months. The reason that you built your business in the first place, or you started in the first place, you're going to keep those things. It's going to enrich your life rather than make things miserable.
Well, and I think that goes back to, what's your goal? What is your why? Why are you doing what you're doing? And yes, when you have a business, you want to make money. Todd, like you said, the thing that keeps you in the game for the long haul is way more than money. Money's out there. It comes if you do the right things. As you were talking, I was thinking about in my early years, and yes, I needed to make money. Our family needed me to work and figure out how to build a profitable business. But my kids needed to see their mom be able to do hard things without laying on the floor crying, even though I wanted to. They needed to see that I could be a creative problem solver with just a good head on my shoulders. I've got 2 daughters and a son, and I wanted them to see me work hard at our events. It's even kind of physical labor. We haul racks and we carry things. I wanted them to know that mom was willing to do hard things, and dad, of course, and that money doesn't just grow on trees. I think when you're building a business while you have a family, while your kids are at home, you're teaching them so many life lessons that are worth way more than whatever quick money you could make. And those are the things that are going to help you raise good children into good functioning adults. And I think business is a great opportunity to give such life lessons to our kids.
I love that you made that point because I think you're exactly right. Did you ever involve your kids with parts of your business and helping out with
Abs-
things?
yes, absolutely. Now not all the time because I was pretty stretched at the events. There's a lot of moving pieces and there are pop-up events, but there were definitely times, and like especially at the end of our events, after our sale is over, we sort everything back so that our consigners can come and pick up their things, and sometimes we needed extra hands, and so the kids would come and sort, and they definitely run computers and they helped at the events. But I think even more than that, we would sit the kids down kind of before event season because for us it was a seasonal business. And I was able to say, now listen, I'm getting ready to move into a busy time. And so I need everybody to step up, and the kids needed to learn to help with their laundry and help with all the things that a stay at home mom tends to do everything, but all of a sudden I wasn't that. And I think it was a great lesson. And I think also, of course, the kids wanted new tennis shoes or this or go to summer camp. And I was able to say, listen, if this sale goes well, if we have a good event, then we can talk about those things. But first, we have to accomplish this together. And so I think it helped them to buy in and not quite be so needy and to learn to help around the house. And then they got to experience the fruit of, as my business did grow and we did make more money, then they could go to that summer camp or go do that extra thing or buy those brand new shoes. And I think it helped them have a good view of life, that things don't just happen because you want them to. And it helped, I think, as a family unit. I'll never forget when we had lived in a really small house for years. My kids all shared one bathroom. It was fine. It was a great house. But we were, again, most of their friends had moved on into these big houses with all these things. And my business had grown to a point where we could go ahead and sell the house we've been in for a long time and buy a bigger house. And I remember my husband, we sat the kids down and he said, now look, Mom's business is doing well, so it looks like we're going to be able to get the next size house. But if her business ever goes bad, we're going to sell the house. We're going to move back into a smaller house, and we're going to still be just fine. We're going to be great. Because I think it is great when those financial blessings come, but those aren't the joy of life. Yes, they come, but we can still be joyful because of who we are, because of our faith, because of our family. And I think, again, business gives you a chance to build good, solid life principles into your kids as they're walking through that.
Now, your kids, I assume they're grown up now. What do they do? Do they have their own businesses? Or are they working? Are they going to college? What are they doing?
They're all doing different things. They all went to college. They went out of Arkansas. They went to college in other states. They are all married. I've got a son that is living overseas doing business. I've got my oldest daughter actually owns two of our franchises in another state. And it was very unexpected. She had been married about 10 years. It was in Oklahoma where she lives. And the franchises came up for sale. She had her first child. And I think all of a sudden she kind of realized the value of the family business. The kids, they hadn't really realized it. So so they own two franchises. And then my youngest daughter lives in Austin, just got married, but I have 5 grandchildren. And actually my youngest daughter, she actually texted me yesterday. She's consigning for the first time in our Austin franchise. And she said, Mom, the website's great. And wow, those videos are so helpful. And so it is kind of fun when your kids finally realize like they kind of knew what mom was doing, but they didn't quite know. And so that's been a fun journey.
Yeah, that's so cool. I know that in our kids, we really wanted to instill that entrepreneurial bug in them. I mean, if they want to go to college, it's fine. But I know for me, like I went to college, I got a degree in music education. I used it for 3 years and then I got re-educated. I did that for another 10 years. And if I had to do it over again, I would just started the business. My wife has a degree in nursing. She did that for 3 years too. Again, it's one of those things where if we had to do it all over again, we would have just started the business from the beginning. And so I know that in our kids, we really want to instill that into them, that entrepreneurial spirit. And I think our oldest one definitely has that. I don't know about the younger one. They will sit there because we homeschool too. And so when my wife is doing her videos or she's on a sales call, one of them will be at a desk right there and he's doing his lessons for homeschool. I've got a desk right beside me on my computer here. You can't see it. But when we really need them to be quiet, they're in this room and they're doing their homework in here. And so they're watching us work. They're watching us engage with our clients. They're watching us do our videos and video editing or putting together a funnel or whatever it is. They're witnessing us do these things. And it's just one of those things, I think, when they see you do that and they see you build the business, that's so important. One of the things I keep hearing about is the generation that builds the wealth and then the next generation tries to take it over and usually they're okay. But then by the third generation, they usually squander it and it's gone. And I don't know if there's a way to prevent that or not, but I know that for our kids, we definitely want them to learn how to build the business and be successful with that, and that work ethic and all that stuff. I feel like we're doing a good job with that, but sometimes I wonder.
I hear that. I think every parent struggles with that, especially if you've achieved some success. You want to make life easier for your kids than your life was. I had so many struggles growing up that I don't want my kids to have. And so I think it's a healthy balance. And when you were saying that, it reminded me that when my son was a teenager, he was playing sports and he wanted extra money. And so we didn't really want him to go get a job at someplace. We just really also didn't really want the outside influences. And plus, we really wanted him to play sports and do all that. And so we helped set him up in a snow cone stand. And, he and my husband built it out. It was a hard job. And it honestly was really hard. I don't think he made very much money, but it was a great experience for him. And I think that because I had a business and we were used to entrepreneurial things, we weren't afraid to let him test this out. And so I do think that's a gift you can give your kids, is it's okay to fail. And honestly, as I was starting my consignment business, I also was teaching tennis lessons because we couldn't afford private lessons at the country club. And I wanted my kids to all learn to play tennis. And so Todd, one summer, I did a summer camp all summer, took all the kids out there, hit tennis balls, in the heat. And at the end of the summer, I made zero money. I mean, I just didn't know about business at the time. Looking back, I could have known at the beginning, but it was just one more lesson of you got to make sure that your expenses and you got to come out with a profit at the end, even after you pay your instructors. But I think the more that we give our kids those opportunities, but also because my husband and I have talked about that as well. I think one of the gifts we can give our kids is don't solve all their problems for them. They need to solve their own problems. We didn't buy our kids fancy cars, even though we could have. We did choose to pay for their education because we didn't want them to come out with debt. And as long as they did their part of making good grades and doing all the things, and then they can, choose to use their degree or not. But I do think, for me, I look back at my call. I think my husband and I both would say that even though we're not necessarily using our specific degrees, those years really stretched our brains. We grew a lot just emotionally and socially, and we wanted our kids to have that experience if they could, but then they can do what they want. But I love what you're saying about encouraging the kids to have entrepreneurial hearts and spirits. And I think it's good, especially if it's realistic. I do feel like I have a young men who I've been sometimes speaking on a college campus or whatever, and sometimes I think that there's some starry eyes out there, I want to be an entrepreneur and like you said, make millions of dollars. And I just think, ooh, that always scares me a little bit because that's not always the typical entrepreneurial journey. You got to work really hard, fail, work a lot of hours. I know in my journey, there were some years when I was working 80 and 100 hours a week. And I honestly had to. Thankfully, my kids were older. They had gone off to college, but I couldn't afford to hire a lot of employees. And so I was launching franchises. I was battling with the government. I was running my events. And so sometimes that's part of it. Now I don't do that anymore, thankfully, but sometimes that is, you have to do what it takes.
So now you mentioned, Kevin, passing a couple times this battle with the government. What was that about? Because I think that's one of those things that it doesn't seem to happen that often, but when it happens, it's a pretty major thing. And it's one of those fears that's always like in the back of my head, like, oh, maybe the government will come after me for something. You never know what it's going to be. But what happened? What's the story with you?
Thank you for asking. Well, to simplify it, I've been franchising about 4 years. So I really was barely above a stay-at-home mom. And we have a very small industry of the children's consignment event industry. And what I've learned is that the Labor Department likes to kind of target one business and go after that business in order to affect the whole industry. So we happen to be that business. And so we ended up battling the federal Labor Department. You don't grow up hoping that someday you're going to do that. I did end up filing a lawsuit against the government, but I had to really protect my business. And it was terrifying. I had millions of dollars of fines over my head. But the main point to the journey, Todd, and it actually lasted about 9 years. So I've mentioned earlier about working all those hours. I was trying to build my business while fighting the government. I had 2 full-time employees. It was incredibly hard, but also incredibly good for me personally, because I just all of a sudden was in the fire and I had to grow a lot. All of a sudden I was on national TV. We had articles in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, just lots of national coverage. And I spoke before Congress a couple of times. I mean, one time I was speaking before Congress and I forgotten my notes and I was on this panel with these like professional lobbyists. I was terrified, but what I learned through that is that my brain had more capacity than I thought. And so I was able to pull out and I learned how to make complicated things simple. I did learn how to be a communicator and I had to just grow in my confidence because I also had franchise owners at the time. And so I wanted to make sure that they would trust me while I was also battling the government. And so I had to learn how to be an authentic leader and not create fear, but also how to keep them educated. And so it was just a really interesting journey that, again, I learned a lot about leadership and my capacity increased. And while I was battling the government, the neat thing is that my franchise owners were also growing as business leaders. And I will share this one story. Well, first of all, we won the first time. We made it all the way to the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. So that's one step down from the Supreme Court for those who don't know. We won the first time, which was amazing. The government appealed and we lost the second time. And I got the news, and this was in 2019. It was the year before COVID. And we got the news at our annual franchise owners conference where we all come together. We encourage and give new information, and it's a big deal. I learned the news at the beginning of the weekend, and it was one of those moments where I really did just want to lay on the floor and cry. Like I wasn't sure what the future held because we were going to have to change our model. And I didn't know what my franchise owners would think because I had fought on their behalf for so long and I felt like I'd failed. So anyway, we got through the weekend, but I just decided not to tell anyone except my inner executive team. They knew. We kept it private. And then I decided to tell our franchise owners on the last day of the conference. And so I was on stage. And as I began to share the news, as a woman, I'd always worked really hard to just not show much emotion, especially not cry, because I felt like that showed weakness. And so I began to share the news and I just started crying on stage. And I was so sad that I had lost, and not been able to protect us more. And it was so amazing that I still remember that my franchise owners began to stand up all across the auditorium and giving me this standing ovation and just in their support of me. And it still makes me emotional. Because basically what we were doing is we were building connection and trust as a company. And we kind of fought a war together. And then we figured out how to pivot and make some changes in our model. And it made us stronger together. It made me stronger as a leader. It made our company stronger. And so, that's the thing about going through the hard times. If you do it the right way, based on your value system, then you have a chance to come out on the other side with blessings that you never anticipated. And so that's really what I love to take away. And I ended up with some skills that I didn't know I had.
Well, and that adaptability, I mean, that's so important for any type of business that you're running at any time because nothing is ever the same forever, right?
It's true. It's true.
I can think of, with me and my wife and our business and, the offers that we've put together and the funnels and the copyright and it's like, it works for a while and then you got to be adaptable, or a social media platform comes along, an ad campaign comes along and it's really hot. And then there's always something that you need to be adapting to, even just in the normal course of business. So yeah, I think that's just an amazing story. Any last words of advice for our audience before we close out here?
Oh, I would just say, don't be afraid. I think women especially can maybe tend to feel insecure, maybe not confident. That's where I was. And I would just say, be courageous. Do something new you haven't done before. Step out of your comfort zone, try some new things. And just the main thing is to continue to grow personally into a leader. I think the world especially needs women leaders who will leave a positive impact, find creative solutions, and keep creating some joy out there.
Awesome. Absolutely. And as far as helping people to grow in their businesses and things like that, you've got something that can help them out as well, don't you?
Absolutely. I'm offering a free consult, an hour free consult of my time. And you can go to rhealana.com. It's RHEALANA.com/podcast. Now, we don't offer a podcast. It's just where you find that little form. You can fill it out. And our team would love to set that up with you. And we also have some leadership resources we would love to get to you for free. And, you might be interested in a franchise, or maybe you're just interested in that next step of personal growth. And I'd love to just be a resource for you.
Awesome. And if people want to connect with you online, do you have social media profiles or something that they can find you on?
Yes, we are all over on LinkedIn, Rhea Lana Riner, also Rhea Lana's, and we're on Instagram and Facebook. We're all over the place, and we would love to connect with folks.
Awesome. Perfect. So, well, we will have the links for all of that in the show notes. So be sure to check those out, everybody. Rhea Lana, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Todd. Have a great day.
You've been listening to the Digital Trailblazer podcast. The strategies and earnings mentioned by our guests represent their individual experiences and results. Nothing shared on this show should be considered a guarantee of earnings or success. The views, opinions, and claims expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official views of the Digital Trailblazer podcast or its hosts. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute professional, financial, legal, or business advice. Please do your own research and consult with qualified professionals before making any business decisions.